On June the 19th, 2026, Xinhua, China's official state news agency, published an article in its Great Journey series titled The Three Great Transformations, an Unprecedented and Profound Social Revolution. The article opened with a nostalgic description of old factory buildings along Shanghai's Suzhou Creek, once owned by the Rong family, one of China's great industrial dynasties. It praised the 1950s campaign of joint state-private ownership as a peaceful redemption, claimed the state paid over 3 billion yuan, more than the original assessed value of the private assets, and concluded that this history provides solid institutional support and valuable experience for China's modernization today. The article caused an uproar among China's private business community, not because it said anything new about history, but because of when it was published, 2026, an article celebrating the state's seizure of private enterprise. Appearing at a time when confidence in China's private sector is already at a historic low, was not read as a history lesson. It was read as a signal. To understand why that signal is so alarming, you need to know what joint state-private ownership actually was. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, the Communist Party issued a document called the Common Program, effectively a provisional constitution, which stated in black and white that the economic interests and private property of the national bourgeoisie would be protected. Mao Zedong spoke of protecting national industry and commerce. Liu Shaoqi told the party that we can work with the national bourgeoisie for at least 10 to 15 years. In hindsight, these promises look more like a tactic to prevent capital flight while the new regime got its footing. The party had just taken over the entire country but lacked the managerial talent to run its industries. The factories had to keep operating, and the people who knew how to run them had to stay at their posts. So for a brief window, private enterprise was tolerated. Capitalists were called friends of the national bourgeoisie. Some were even given seats on the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Rong Yiren continued running his textile and flour empire. Liu Hongsheng kept managing his cement and coal businesses. Lu Zuofu kept running his Minsheng shipping company. Everyone assumed life would go on this way. The window lasted about 2 years. In late 1951, the Three Anti-campaign began ostensibly targeting corruption among party and government cadres, but the scope quickly expanded to private business. In early 1952, the Five Anti-campaign was formally launched, aimed squarely at capitalists. The 5 charges were bribery, tax evasion, theft of state property, cheating on government contracts, and stealing state economic intelligence. The conviction rates tell you everything about the true nature of this campaign. Across 9 major cities including Beijing, Tianjin, and Shanghai, over 450,000 private businesses were investigated. Of those, 76% were found guilty of at least one of the 5 poisons. In Shanghai, the rate was 85%. In Beijing, it was 99%. When 9 out of 10 business owners in a country are simultaneously found to be criminals, that is not a real crime rate. It means the legal standards were designed to produce convictions, not to regulate a market. During the campaign, struggle sessions were held across the country. Workers were organized to denounce their employers. Business owners were forced onto stages to confess their crimes. Methods included beating, binding, forcing people to kneel for hours, sleep deprivation, and, in some cases, torture with heated irons. In Shanghai alone, between January the 25th and April the 1st, 1952, fewer than 70 days, 876 people killed themselves because of the campaign. That is more than 10 suicides per day. Many were couples who died together. Some took their children with them. In Guangdong province, 69 suicide cases and 39 deaths were recorded by early March. In Qingdao, Shandong, 172 people were beaten to death or killed themselves. In Jiangjing, Sichuan, torture by hanging and physical abuse drove 58 people to suicide. These are only the fragmentary numbers that were made public. The national total has never been compiled and almost certainly never will be. So many people were dying that authorities had to station guards on rooftops to prevent jumpers, deploy soldiers to patrol parks, and ban pedestrians from approaching the Huangpu River after dusk. Imagine a government that needs to post sentries on the rooftops of a city to stop its own citizens from throwing themselves off. That was the atmosphere in which joint state-private ownership was introduced. The 5 anti-campaign's real achievement was not the fines collected or the people arrested. It was the complete destruction of the capitalist class's psychological capacity to resist. After the campaign, these people were no longer business owners. They were convicted criminals, socially ostracized, subject to re-investigation at any time. When the government came to them with the offer of joint state-private ownership, they could not refuse. They did not dare refuse. Internal party documents from the period record the motives of business owners who applied for joint ownership. Some figured it was inevitable and wanted to be first in line. Some saw their peers applying and didn't want to lose face by holding out. Some saw government work teams arriving and concluded that resisting would only make things worse. Not one of these descriptions contains the word voluntary. Every single one describes coercion. The only variation is in the form it took. The total assessed value of all private enterprises nationwide was set at 2,420 million yuan. This number was determined unilaterally by the government. Business owners had no negotiating power whatsoever. Crucially, intangible assets, trademarks, brand names, decades or generations of accumulated reputation, customer relationships, were assigned a value of 0. What was the Tangrentang pharmacy brand worth? What was the Kwangju roast duck brand worth? Ru Fushang, Zhang Xiaokuang, Wu Liangkai. These names, some dating back centuries, were valued at nothing. The redemption was paid as a fixed annual dividend of 5% of the assessed value. Dispersed over 10 years, payments stopped in 1966. The total came to just over 3 billion yuan, slightly more than the 2.42 billion assessment, which is what Xinhua's 2026 article meant by exceeding the original asset value. But this money did not come from state coffers. It came from the profits generated by the businesses themselves. The government used the enterprise's own earnings to pay the former owners a price far below market value, spread over a decade, and then kept the enterprises permanently. The 5% annual rate was lower than bank deposit interest rates at the time, and far below the actual profit margins of most of these businesses. Some earned over 20% annually, but the former owners received only 5%, with the rest going to the state treasury. In early 1956, the final push for industry-wide joint ownership proceeded at a speed that surprised even Mao Zedong. Beijing went from application to completion in 10 days. In Shanghai, over 100,000 private businesses across 205 industries were converted overnight. Mao himself said at a Supreme State Conference on January the 25th, 1956, joint ownership has moved very fast. No one anticipated this. Not even Zhuge Liang could have predicted it. That speed tells you this was not a business-by-business negotiation with proper asset valuation and contract signing. It was a political campaign, no different from land reform or the 5 anti, an order from above, executed in lockstep below. After conversion, the former owners became nominal shareholders with no management authority. They sat in the companies they had built and watched government-appointed cadres run everything. Then the Cultural Revolution began in 1966, and even the token dividends stopped. The original plan was to pay 5% annually for 20 years. In practice, only 10 years were paid, and the remaining 10 were simply defaulted on. Private property rights were legally extinguished. All joint enterprises became fully state-owned. During the Cultural Revolution, the former capitalists were dragged out for another round of public humiliation. Rong Yaren was struggled against and had his home raided. Guo Lingshuang, owner of the Wing On department store, was denounced as a capitalist and died of a heart attack in 1974. In Shanghai alone, over 48,000 capitalist households were raided. involving nearly 500 million yuan in seized assets. What happened to the brands? Tangrentung Pharmacy still exists, but it has no connection to the founding family. Huangju still exists, also severed from its original owners, Wu Liangkai. An optician shop founded in 1719 was passed down for nearly 300 years before being absorbed into a state-owned enterprise through joint ownership. In 2001, descendants of the Wu family tried to open an eyeglass shop using their own ancestral name. The state-owned company sued them for trademark infringement and won. The court ruled that although Wu Liangkai was originally a personal name, it now belonged to the enterprise, and since the family had not reserved the right to use it during the joint ownership process, they could not use their own family name. Your ancestral name was taken by the state, and using it yourself is now a crime. From the 5 Anti-campaign in 1952 to the complete extinction of private property rights in 1966. The entire process took less than 15 years. An entire social class was physically broken, financially stripped, and erased from public life. Nationwide, 710,000 private business owners received fixed dividends, plus another 100,000 non-operating beneficiaries, 810,000 people in total, along with their families. These were the subjects of what Xinhua calls peaceful redemption. Then history executed a dramatic reversal. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping launched the reform and opening up, re-legitimizing individual and private enterprise. The state pivoted 180 degrees from abolishing private ownership to encouraging it. Private enterprises grew from nothing into the most dynamic sector of China's economy. Huawei, Vanke, Alibaba, Tencent. This reversal is itself the most powerful repudiation of joint state-private ownership. If the 1956 system was truly progressive, why did the party overturn it in 1978? China's most prosperous decades were built not on the legacy of joint ownership, but on its repudiation. In 1991, the CCP Central Committee endorsed a report from the United Front Work Department, commonly known as Central Document Number 15, that contained 3 key commitments. First, today's private entrepreneurs should not be simplistically compared or equated with the capitalists of the past. Second, they must not be subjected to socialist transformation, as in the 1950s. Third, the All-China Federation of Industry and Commerce shall not perish in one generation. That was the party's promise in 1991. After 2013, the wind began shifting again. At the 3rd plenum of the 18th Central Committee, the CCP formally launched mixed ownership reform, cross-shareholding between state and private capital. On paper, this was bidirectional. Private investors could buy into SOAS, and state capital could buy into private firms. In practice, the latter direction, state capital entering private enterprises, has become increasingly dominant. In 2017, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and other private giants paid approximately 7.8 billion yuan for a 35% stake in state-owned China Unicom, a landmark mixed ownership deal. But the direction soon reversed. Academics now call the new trend reverse mixed ownership reform, not private capital entering state firms, but state capital entering private ones. The most revealing mechanism is the golden share system. The state takes a stake of 1% or even less, but acquires a board seat and special voting rights, including veto power over major corporate decisions. Since 2023, this system has been rapidly extended to internet platforms, media companies, and technology firms. Both Alibaba and Tencent have accepted golden share arrangements with state capital entities. Is this identical to the 1950s? No, today's goal is not full nationalization, but the expansion of state influence and control while preserving the private enterprise shell. But if you break down the 1953 to 1956 process step by step, the beginning looked similar too. The state would contribute some capital. The business owner would contribute equipment. They would co-manage. The state would merely send representatives to the board. That sounds remarkably like today's mixed ownership reform. From 1949 to 1956, the full cycle, from protecting private property to abolishing it, took only 7 years. The first 3 years were a gentle phase of utilizing, restricting, and transforming. The last 4 years were a sudden acceleration into industry-wide conversion, token compensation, and the extinguishing of property rights. A slippery slope. The first half was gradual. The second half was a foot slamming the accelerator to the floor. Today's threats to private enterprise go beyond macro-level policy. At the local level, private business assets are being seized through a variety of concrete methods that any foreign investor or business partner should understand. The first is asset seizure through criminal prosecution. When a majority shareholder or legal representative is charged with a crime, public security organs freeze and seize the entire company's assets, making no distinction between criminal proceeds and the legitimate investments of minority shareholders and creditors. The Supreme People's Court has explicit rules prohibiting the conflation of a shareholder's personal crimes with corporate assets, but at the local level, these rules are routinely ignored. The Sun Dawu case in Hebei province is the textbook example. Sun spent 36 years building a 5 billion yuan agricultural conglomerate from 1,000 chickens and 50 pigs. After a land dispute with a state-owned farm, he and 20 family members and executives were arrested in a pre-dawn raid. He was convicted on 8 charges and sentenced to 18 years. The company's assets, self-valued at over 5 billion yuan, were auctioned by the court for 686 million. Roughly 1/7 of their value. The buyer was a company registered just 2 days before the auction, whose legal representative was the nephew of Hebei's richest man, and whose supervisor was the recently dismissed deputy chief judge of the local court. The second is what Chinese legal circles now call deep sea fishing. Cash-strapped local police departments travel to other provinces to arrest private business owners, freeze their bank accounts, and confiscate their funds, all under the pretext of criminal investigation, but with the real objective of raising revenue. In 2024, China's national tax revenue fell 3.4% year-on-year, while non-tax revenue surged 25.4%. In some localities, fines and confiscations account for up to 40% of non-tax revenue. Approximately 90% of criminal forfeitures go to local treasuries, and a portion is returned to the investigating agency as case handling expenses, creating a direct financial incentive to arrest more people and confiscate more assets. According to the Financial Times, over 80 executives of listed companies were detained by police across China in 2024 alone, roughly half involving cross-jurisdictional enforcement. An internal report from Guangdong Province's Research Center disclosed that nearly 10,000 private enterprises in Guangzhou alone were subjected to cross-provincial seizures in 2023. The third is what is called criminalizing debt. When a local government or state-owned enterprise owes money to a private business and cannot pay, instead of going through civil litigation, it uses the public security apparatus to fabricate criminal charges against the creditor. You came to collect a debt, you leave as a criminal suspect. Once arrested, and with your accounts frozen, your own business collapses. Then the negotiation begins. Will you accept 30 cents on the dollar? 50 cents? You don't have much choice when you are sitting in a detention center. The fourth method is regulatory harassment. Environmental inspections, fire safety checks, tax audits, market supervision. Each individually appears to be routine enforcement, but when multiple agencies descend on the same business simultaneously, the message is clear. This is not an inspection. This is a squeeze. The purpose might be to force you off a piece of land, wanted for another project, to settle a personal grudge held by an official, or simply to extract money. The fifth is selective anti-corruption enforcement. If you've done business with a particular official, received land, won contracts, you prosper as long as that official is in power. The moment they fall in a factional purge, Every business associated with them is investigated. The money you paid them is now called bribery. The land you received is now called illegal proceeds. The contracts you signed are now called interest transfer. In China's business environment, it is virtually impossible to operate at scale without engaging with political power. But every interaction with power becomes a potential noose around your neck. Pangdonglai, a celebrated retail chain in Henan province, provides a striking recent example of preemptive self-defense. In early 2026, reports emerged that the Henan and Zhengzhou governments had invited Pangdonglai to open its first store in Zhengzhou, initially promising to build a commercial complex and lease it to the company. Midway through the project, authorities allegedly reversed course and demanded that Pangdonglai fund the construction itself, requesting approximately 4 billion yuan, almost exactly matching the company's known liquid assets of about 4.1 billion. The store's opening date was postponed repeatedly. Then China's National Consumer Rights broadcast singled out Pangdonglai for alleged product quality issues. The pattern reputation attack followed by asset seizure was instantly recognizable. Pangdonglai's founder, Yu Donglai, made an unexpected move. In March of 2026, he announced the distribution of nearly 4 billion yuan in company assets and profits to all employees, 718 managers, and 8,913 frontline workers. Ordinary employees received roughly 200,000 yuan each. Store managers received approximately 20 million each. He then announced his retirement. The logic was transparent. If you want my money, I'll distribute it to 9,000 people first. To claw it back, you'll have to take it from 9,000 ordinary workers one by one. Yu himself reportedly said, if you don't distribute the money, you'll end up dead anyway. Yu succeeded because he acted before the machinery moved. Sunday Do did not have that window. By the time police entered his compound at 3 a.m., everything was already over. Lay the timeline end to end and the pattern becomes unmistakable. 1949, written promise to protect private property. 1952, 90% of private business owners classified as criminals. 1956, all private enterprises converted to state ownership. 1966, even token dividends stopped. Property rights extinguished. 1978, admission that the previous approach was wrong. Private enterprise re-legitimized. 1991, written promise never to repeat the 1950s. 2013 onward, mixed ownership reform advances. State capital enterprises, golden share system spreads. 2026, Xinhua publishes an article celebrating the 1950s joint ownership as valuable experience. Promise, betrayal. Promise, betrayal. Two complete cycles have already played out. Where the third cycle currently stands is a question each observer must answer for themselves. The core reality that outside observers need to grasp is this. In China, private property rights have never been treated as an inviolable right. They function more as a conditional license, conditional on your political compliance, your economic usefulness, your connections to power, and the fiscal health of your local government. When any one of these conditions changes, your assets can be legally stripped in a matter of days, with virtually no possibility of recovery. Lu Zuofu, one of China's greatest industrialists, trusted the party's promises and handed over everything. He died in 1952. Nearly 30 years later, in 1980, the party issued a belated verdict. He did many good things for the people. The party and the people will not forget him. His son Lu Guoji recalled that in 1969, while imprisoned in a couch during the Cultural Revolution, two propaganda team workers came in one evening, held his hands and said, "We know Lu Zuofu. He was a good man." Lu Zuofu believed the promises. He gave up his life's work 30 years later. The only thing he got back was the sentence, "He was a good man." He died with his dignity intact, but nothing he believed in turned out to be true.